So, helping us review this week's news is Bristol's Mayor, George Ferguson. Hi, George, and welcome to the Politics Show.
It's good to be here.
Now, first of all, you've been mayor for a couple of years now. And
20 months?
Yes, nearly 2 years. Tell us how it's all going. Was it how you expected?
In that I expected the unexpected. It's going exactly as I expected. No, I think I don't regret it for a minute. I mean, it's had its tough and difficult bits, and it has its really joyful bits. And I knew it would be like that. Maybe I do get a bit bored of some of the politics, but that comes with a job. I like doing things. I like making things happen. That's always my purpose in life. We've
got something like 350, 400,000 people living in the city.
Yeah.
Don't you think it's too big a job for one person, what you're trying to do? Because, really, even the elected councillors now, they have to lobby you. They have to ask you what to do. And you can't have your eyes everywhere, George, can you?
Well, I think you need a sense of direction, and Bristol didn't have a sense of direction. It'd been chopping and changing. I think if you wanted nothing to happen, we had the perfect form of governance. But if you want things to happen, I think it is good that you have an ultimate decision maker at the top. It doesn't mean I make all the decisions. I devolve decisions a lot. I have a cabinet of 5 who I work extremely closely with and have great respect for. They come from 4 different political parties. We share a lot of the decision making, and I share it across the executive as well. So it's certainly not a city run by one person, but it is important, I think, in the end, to have somebody who is prepared to make decisions.
Well, practically speaking, you say you've been down to Lockleys today. Give us an idea of what you were up to there. Just a normal, average day, I suppose, for you.
I like to get out of the office, and I think everybody does. And I think an essential part of my job is understanding Bristol as a whole. I was at Lockleys at the Wordworth Centre, which is a community centre that they built a community garden with the help of local children, and the children were decision makers in part of that, and they've got a partnership with businesses. Airbus and Serco were very evident partners, as is the housing association that works in the area. So I just thought it was a really good community event that had a brilliant spirit to it, and it's contributing to our ambition to be a very green city.
Yeah, but are you happy to be dealing with Serco? I mean, they've had they've been fined, haven't they? Millions of pounds of public money. They stole Serco. Maybe they used some of it to pay for this community project.
Well, to be honest, I look at the result. I look at the fact that there is a community getting something really good.
So would you deal with arms dealers, for example, if they were helping sponsor this? Because Serco, I mean, if you look at the news trace of Serco over the last year or so, they have been doing government contracts where, for example, they've been pretending that people are being looked after in prisons and that kind of thing when they don't even exist, and actually extorting money from the public. The Public Accounts Committee have really knocked them down, and maybe some of those profits have been used in this community centre. There's got to be questions there about the ethics of that.
Well, this wasn't about the profits, it's about the people. And the people who work within these firms are very good people. Yeah, these are the workers within Airbus and in this case Serco, and they were giving their time. It was a volunteering project, and I'm a great supporter of volunteering, and I think I want to see much more volunteering across the city in various fields. We've won an award which gives us a volunteering officer. It's Dominic Murphy, who's done an enormous amount across various communities in the city, who's going to coordinate volunteering in certain aspects across the city. And I think that's a really good thing when we've got people who are looking out for their neighbours, dealing with loneliness and isolation in this case, dealing with helping literacy in schools, dealing with environmental and food growing projects. And I think it's good both for the volunteers and the people who are the recipients.
So you would deal with anybody, even an arms firm? If they were to put some money into a community project, you think that's okay?
Well, we do have aerospace firms, I mean, Rolls-Royce you could say is an arms firm, but they have a lot of they have a lot of civil contracts as well, and they have a workforce that are Bristol citizens.
Now, I know,
so I'm going to deal with them.
Yeah, before you became mayor, George, I remember chatting to you about whether you were going to be able to actually get a bit of a voice up at Westminster. Has that happened? Because it doesn't seem like there's been an open door at Downing Street for you to lobby for Bristol up at Westminster. And in fact, if anything, it seems like the divide is even greater.
Not at all. No, I could probably get more access than any city leader. And
how's that?
I think they like the fact that Bristol decided to go for the mayoral model, and that was part of the government agenda, and actually I have to say it's Labour agenda as well. So that has pleased them. I think they like the independence. I think they like the fact that Bristol is now punching above its weight.
So what have you won?
We're doing really well. And I do get into Downing Street.
Okay, great. So what have you won for the city?
Well, specifically, we won the best growth deal per head of population of any city region in the recent in the recent competition for our strategic economic plan. So that that's very significant, of tens of millions. We specifically. As a direct ask, I got some major backing from European Green Capital directly from the government. That's the biggest backing that any of the European Green Capitals have managed to get from their central government. So there are lots and lots of examples where we're doing very well, and we're also going out and winning stuff for ourselves. We have one of the world's resilient cities, only 5 in Europe. That the Rockefeller Foundation have decided to award. That goes very well with our European Green Capital status.
Hey, the Rockefeller Foundation, because they've set up a little group with the Rockefeller family, anyway, with the Rothschild family, in order to buy up distressed assets, making a big advantage of the financial crisis. So as people's businesses go out from underneath them, they're able to capitalise on it. Again, I mean, they're not the most ethical, are they? They started off, the Rockefeller family, as an oil firm. Had to be broken up in the United States because they were monopolising the entire country's oil supply, including trains and transport and everything to do with oil. And then they realised it was actually easier and cheaper to go into banking, where you could press a button on a keyboard and make up loads of money out of nowhere and spend it. So are they ethical, the Rockefellers?
Well, the Rockefeller Foundation is extremely ethical, and it's always looking at social issues. It's as ethical in its operation as people like the Rowntree Trust, and I just think I don't there deal with. I'm not dealing with the businesses of Rockefeller. I'm dealing with a charitable foundation that is dealing with a huge amount of really important social issues in the States.
Also, everyone with 2 brain cells to rub together knows we don't really live in a fully operating democracy in this country. I mean, most of our political parties are fiercely influenced by the City of London. I mean, they do seem to come across more and more as a bunch of loan sharks, the city. Are you really batting for Bristol and for Bristolians against the way that the city, the financial crisis, has brought this country to its knees in so many ways in 2008 and doesn't really ever seem to have paid the price?
Well, I can't ignore reality. I can only spend what I get. I think we're doing very well in terms of batting above our weight, and I think while we're all suffering to a certain extent from austerity, we're doing extremely well in the way we're dealing with it.
But George, they're not, are they? Because a lot of wealthy people are doing actually very well out of it. Share portfolios going up, expensive houses, mansions, these kinds of them. You're an architect, you know about this stuff. If you've got a mansion, it's actually going massively up in value, particularly in the south of England.
Yeah, well, I would like to have a local income tax. I just think that we have a strange taxation system that is based on a very uneven form of property taxation locally. Why should somebody who's living in a huge mansion be paying the same amount as somebody who's living in a rather large semi-D? It should be, there should be a difference at the top. So we've got a very crude sort of layered poll tax, really, and I think we need an absolute transformation of local taxation. I say that a lot too.
What about the rates?
There's nothing fairer than income tax.
What about the rates? Because then you're taxing people who've got property. I mean, this is the old system, isn't it?
Well, the rates are council tax. That's what.
Well, no, it's not. No, council tax is per head. The rates are on the property owner. I mean, they might then decide to. The problem is,
are you talking about business rates or council tax?
Council tax.
Council tax is the old-fashioned.
Quite often, people cannot pay the council tax because they're so poor. If you've got a property, at least you're able to pay it.
Bristol is one of the very few councils that has taken a hit deliberately in order to be able to back poor people not having to pay their council tax. So actually the council tax reduction scheme, which the government took away from us, is costing me $3 million a year or so in terms of the budget. But I've regarded that as highly important. It is part of having a fairer city, and that I think the biggest legacy I could leave is leaving a relatively rich city, a fairer one, with everybody having a much more equal opportunity, and poverty in a rich city is all the more grinding.
Now, I mean, yes, because this is what seems to be happening. Not just Bristol, right across the country, is the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. And not actually really enough jobs to go around. Although we've got more people in employment, that employment is of worse quality. People don't have the number of hours that they need to pay the bills anymore, as much as they used to anyway. And the people who've done incredibly well out of all this, George, are your old pals, the merchant venturers, people who are very wealthy.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to make too much of a point of it, but back in the
I'd never guess you'd ever
back in the old slave trade days, 20 million Africans were shipped across the Atlantic. 2 million of them died on the way. What were you thinking of joining this society?
Well, because they're a charitable organisation. Of course, there's a dodgy and shady past, and I judge people on what they do today. And I have to say that some despicable things happen in the past that I'm never going to be an apologist for. But what matters is what good they're doing for the youth, for education, for old people. And, and I look at what the merchants have done for the city. It is tremendously important, and the city would be worse off without them. So, one can grind on about their history, but what matters is what they do.
Oh, absolutely. And, of course, we've got both of the Bristol NHS Trusts, the University Hospitals Bristol Trust and the North Bristol Trust, both chaired by merchants ventures, so that their influence is still very big today. I think I'm talking about each of those trusts is £500 million worth of public money. The problem here is that actually both of these individuals, I think it's Peter Rillett, isn't it? And John Savage,
yes,
both of them come from the business community, and we know we're in the middle of a reorganisation of the National Health Service. Both of them seem to have that business mindset that the government want when they're privatising, which is effectively what they're doing across the health service. So they are still having influence today, the merchants, and not necessarily in an egalitarian direction. With a business head on, they're looking at the possibility of also making money out of healthcare, which is what the NHS was set up to stop.
It might surprise you that John Savage was the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner candidate, so he's hardly your typical merchant profile.
But he was a chair of Business West as well, wasn't he? He was a chair of the business community.
But he comes from actually quite a socialist background, and he has a passion for the issues that I'm talking about poverty and housing and things like that. So I think it's not a coincidence, because what the merchants do is that they tend to target for membership the people who are the movers and shakers in the city. And it's not just about business people. It's about, I'm not a big successful businessman, but they notice that I do a lot in the city. I mean, the vice chancellors of the universities are merchants. So it's a huge variety of people with an enormous amount of skills and experience.
Well, yes, you are very influential.
It's great when they're prepared to give their time and their expertise to a public
They're certainly very influential, very wealthy, own vast amounts of the city.
Oh, as a whole. No,
they own.
They don't.
Well, in Clifton they do. Yes, they do. They do. They own the Downs, for example. They own, big chunks of the city.
They can't flog any of it, so that's a technicality.
No, but it is worth a lot.
It's shared with the city. Yeah.
I mean, these events the merchant venturers hold. Do you still see any of the merchants? Do you still chat with them? And
you can't live in Bristol without bumping into them. I mean, there are about, I can't remember, there are about 70 of them or 80 of them or something, and they play a part in Bristol's life. So bound to bump into some. Now, I don't see them as a group.
You're very influential, George. Don't you think that maybe the merchants looked at you and thought, crikey, better have him in than out?
Well, this was a long time ago when I was a mere, I certainly didn't have influence. I might have been interfering in the life of the city. And I've always been, I've always looked from outside, and I may look as if I'm establishment, but I am very much a rebel, and I'm maybe I'm an establishment rebel, but I like to stir things and make changes and make differences.
Well, me too.
I hardly have a conservative, a conservative outlook with a small c.
Also, another thing that's come up recently is your choice of having this chap Matt Payne from KPMG as one of your advisors. Now, I mean, just tell us a little bit about, is he still involved in the city? Because I know he was helping you with the accounts, because that really bothers me. KPMG, incredibly dodgy company, signed off the accounts of some of the big banks, Lloyds included, in the run-up to the crash. Obviously, those accounts weren't what they were supposed to be, and so is Matt still around? And if not, did you fire him?
I haven't seen Matt for a year. He gave some extremely useful advice, some of which has contributed to our what I will reveal as financial turnaround shortly. I'm grateful to the work that KPMG have done. I think it's a bit dodgy calling them a dodgy company. They are a company that do have their own ethics.
Hang on, because they are being investigated.
They're ahead of us on paying the living wage. They've been, I think that they're, any huge company, you might question, especially in the financial sector, is hardly going to be absolutely as clean as one would like them to be. But I'm not going to cast aspersions on them. I have to deal with the major consultants, and you've got to use the best expertise. I owe it to the public to use the best expertise to make sure Bristol gets a really good deal.
Well, actually, calling them dodgy is probably quite kind compared to what the Competition Commission have called them, because they've been doing an ongoing investigation into them and the other 4 big audit firms, and it looks like there's some really serious questions about whether the accounts that they've signed off, particularly big city companies, are worth the paper they're written on. But anyhow,
I can assure you we're working with some very sound individuals, and I think you can only judge big companies by the individuals you work with.
Ultimately, George, you're an architect. Do you really know about accounts? Because that's what someone who's in your job needs to be able to. They need to go through the city's accounts, through the budget, and really be able to see that. And can you do that as an architect?
I'm also an entrepreneur, and I've sat on a lot of boards, and I do know about being thorough about getting the right people and getting the right advice. And so I think, good running a thing well is about being able to pick the right managers, and that I do know how to do.
One of the issues that's just come up also recently is the planned half closure of Bush Residential Unit up in Hengrove, and this is a respite care unit.
Yes. Yes, I know it.
Which is actually desperately needed by families who have mostly it's disabled children, some mentally ill too, and that it looks like it's going to be cut back. Surely, George, you should be making sure that stays open, fully open.
Yeah, what you're doing is targeting particular isolated cases. What I'm interested in is having better, more available, appropriate respite care across Bristol. And sometimes, in order to improve things, you have to change them. So I'm not going to defend every single institution. What I'm absolutely determined to do is to see that we spend what we've got more effectively and better in the interests of our communities and special communities in that particular case. I'm not going to just, because of an absolutely understandable concern by the families that use bush, we are listening about how we do it.
But surely you've got one thing you've got to make sure of.
I've got to make quite sure we've got the right respite care in the right place in Bristol, and there's a programme called Shared Lives that certainly is part of that.
But surely, I mean, the basic no-brainer with this is you've got to make sure that care that you want to replace it is there before you start closing down the existing care, haven't you?
Well, we are. I mean, I can absolutely sure we're not going to leave anybody without the appropriate care.
OK. What are your thoughts about the Royal Mail sell-off, for example? I mean, this is one of the things which KPMG, amongst others, were involved with. And, this seems to me that this is symptomatic of the problems we've got in the country. I'm not blaming you for this. I just want your thoughts on it.
Well,
because the public has lost £1 billion because this was sold short. And this is the City of London, really, with our arm behind the back of the Chancellor saying, let's do it this way, let's do it this way. But the country's lost £1 billion.
Yeah, well, it was a misjudgment. And it's always, and I'm not going to defend the decision, because clearly, in hindsight, it was, they got the wrong figure. And I think, that is the nature of shares. You can't quite tell what's going to happen, but I do think that it looks as if Vince Cable was not well advised.
OK. Also, Old Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers, let's just bring you in here. I mean, we'll have a bit more about some of the other stuff you've been up to, George, in a minute.
OK,
but Martin, we've had figures today, haven't we, about the GDP in Britain. It looks all wonderful. We've been told by the Office of National Statistics that GDP is rising 0.8%, and it's going past its pre-crisis peak, because all of this really is about making sure that George has got the money he needs to run the city well, and this is starting to look good, isn't it?
Well, let's just put this in perspective. In a functioning capitalist economy, you would expect 3% growth per year. And that soon adds up to, in a compound way, to quite a lot. So the fact that the economy is only back where we started in 2008 is unprecedented in modern history. And of course, the other point to make is that the population has grown quite considerably in that period. So GDP per head is lower than before the crisis started. What the government are trying to spin this as is this is turning the corner now. The crisis is over. We're on the road to recovery, and I'm afraid we're not. And it's not just because the government's incompetent. It's because the system itself is extremely dysfunctional. It would be exactly the same probably if you had a different government, because governments in fact don't have a great deal of power over this anymore.
Well, according to Jason Douglas on MarketWatch.com, it means that the UK's recovery means the Bank of England's on course to be the first of the world's major central banks to call time on crisis-era monetary policy and to begin slowly raising interest rates. Investors expect the Bank of England to begin tightening policy early next year.
Well, that's part of the problem, because the expectation is, I mean, what you'll have seen happening is, as we get situations where the economy looks as if it's weakening, the stock market in the US in particular starts to rise, because they're expecting more quantitative easing, in other words, more money printing. And I suspect that Britain's rather hot flush, as it were, of economic growth in the middle of the fever is largely to do with the fact that we're the biggest money printers in Europe. The Germans have largely stopped that elsewhere in Europe. And why are the Germans so stupid, not printing money? Why are we so clever to print it? The problem is the system itself is dysfunctional, and I'm sure that George understands this as well. We got ourselves into a situation where the supposedly private financial sector ultimately had to be bailed out by the state, but the ideology of the free market just carries on regardless, even though in actual fact the real balance of forces between state intervention and private enterprise has been completely revolutionised by the crisis. But everybody wants to just go back to how it was before, and I'm afraid we're going to have further shocks before people accept the reality of the fact that the system is fundamentally broken.
Well, what's your reading of all this, George?
Well, I agree with an awful lot of what Martin says. Why don't we hear about balance of payments anymore?
Yes.
I just think it's really extraordinary. It used to be that was the monthly news, and it was the monthly news because it really mattered.
I think it's because it's bad news every month now.
Yeah.
They don't want to just keep reminding us how bad it is, how much more we're importing than exporting.
Yeah, so there's something very unreal about our economy. because we're not earning as much as we're spending. And so, yes, we may be back to where we were in 2008, and we have had absolutely an unprecedented knock. It was a really, really serious knock and affected a hell of a lot of people who lost their all as a result. I like to feel that news is right, but I treat it with huge pinch of salt.
But Martin, isn't it probably, I mean, I'm guessing here, but I think it's probably true to say that there are quite a lot of incentives to put positive news out about the economy. I mean, I know you're a doom and gloom merchant most of the time, but there must be some sort of halfway between the two.
Well, I mean, the fact is, don't forget that those who are selling stocks and shares and trying to get re-elected have got a vested interest in saying, hey, it's all going good. So there's an inevitable bias there. And I mean, the point is, I would not be I'm not in the business of trying to deliberately find bad news out of good news, but the fundamentals are still fundamentally wrong, and that's if we're going to reform the financial sector, people have got to understand how badly out of line it is with what should be expected of it.
And to be honest, I think we need another index. We need an index of satisfaction, and GDP is a funny measure because it measures all the bad things. Well, it measures things we don't want. It measures the accidents. And I would like us to be measuring well-being.
Well, I mean, that's about the pound in your pocket. The cost of living crisis, they call it, don't they? If you just can't pay the bills, obviously things aren't going to be looking too good for you. But George, let me put it to you. I mean, looking at the way that the economy's been going, people like you, I mean, would you like to share with us what your rough personal wealth is?
Well, I own the tobacco factory, which owes quite a bit of money to the bank, because I always owe money to the bank. I own a brewery from which I have not yet taken any money out, because I put the money back in, because I see it as being a local enterprise that benefits local regeneration. I'm not a typical business person. I don't have money for money's sake. I have money to do the things I believe in.
Well, most of your money is working for you. That's what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, would you like to put a figure on it?
It'd be difficult to put a figure on it, but I think my net worth is probably less than $1 million because of all the liabilities that I have as well.
But I mean, have you done quite well out of this crisis? For many people at the other end of austerity,
no, certainly not. I've worked mighty hard all my life, but I do believe that we should have a fairer society where nobody is worth more than about 10 times anybody else, but we seem to have some ridiculous extremes where some people are worth hundreds of, thousands times others, and in terms of their salaries, which seems completely wrong.
That amazes me is that for many of these individuals, they've got far more money than they could ever spend, even if they decided, right, I'm going to go on a complete spend-aholic. They could never ever spend it, but they still want more. Why is that?
My only purpose ever of wanting any money at all is do something with it. So I do find it really odd when people just sit on their money. Why earn hundreds of millions and then go to some tax haven and, bore me to death? So I just don't understand that mentality one little bit. And I think what I do understand is those who do good with their money. I think, in the States now, there seems to be almost a race to the top in terms of what you can give away for charity. And I think that is something that I would like to see happening in this country. It sickens me to see people leaving so much to their children that all they can do is become drug addicts. That's no use at all. What people should be doing is, if they're making lots of money, is thinking what good they can do for society with it.
Well, I know Fairness was one of the commissions you set up when you first became mayor, which are now reporting some of these commissions, one on fairness, one on housing, sport and education skills. Just tell us about how those are going, because I know the housing one reported recently.
Yeah, they've all reported now. I set them up about 9 months ago. They've done about 6-7 months of actual work. We've brought in some of the very, very best people. I mean, including people like Richard Wilkinson, author of The Spirit Level, which is an absolutely revolutionary book about fairness.
Which Martin's always going on about, actually.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant book. And, you don't have a happy society if in an unfair society, and we all suffer in the long run. So while you can't have equality, you can at least strive towards more equality of opportunity. And they've come up with 50 recommendations, which I'm not going to string out, but they're all towards trying to make Bristol a place where there is less of a health and wealth gap and education gap and access gap. And so, you know, is it fair to have a society where you're stuck in the suburbs, in some of the poorer suburbs of Bristol, are not able to partake in some of the facilities, great facilities that we have in Bristol?
There's a lot of people that just simply can't do that. I mean, one of the reports we I think it was in the Independent newspaper towards the end of last year, was saying that so many families now, something like a third of families, are finding that they don't have the money to do simple things like go to the cinema. There just isn't any surplus money around.
No,
everything
some of those
is
are
committed.
people in work too.
Yes, that's
so
right.
It's not just about the people out of work. It's about, you know, there's been a lot of talk about living wage. I've taken some knocks about the living wage because I wanted to make quite sure we were in a sound position to be able to institutionalise it, to make it a permanent thing. But I've actually been paying living wage ever since I became elected, although it was in arrears for the last 2 years. But now, as from last week, we've now instituted the living wage. Actually, as from this week, I've made an announcement that we will institute the living wage to all our employees. I think the next thinking is about how we entice all our contractors to pay the living wage. I would like to see Bristol becoming a living wage city, and that is a wage on which people can survive and have a bit of spending money. Now, I think it particularly applies to people who are living they're either living in a relationship and have a proper home. It may apply a bit less to people who are living on more of something like a student life where they're sharing accommodation and everything. But the majority of people need to be paid what I think should be a minimum wage, and that is what we now call the living wage.
Now, I know just before you got elected, we had a discussion programme on here with all the mayor candidates, and almost all of them anyway, certainly all the ones who were in any chance of winning. And we discussed housing, and your housing commission has just reported. Yes. And so before we discuss that, let's just hear from the chair of that commission, who's Nick Horn from Nightstone Housing. We ought to declare an interest because I'm also involved with Nightstone too.
How are you? Right.
My name is Nick Horn, and I've been chair of the Bristol Homes Commission, which was set up by Mayor Ferguson as one of his 4 commissions. And we recently issued our report. In my day job, I'm chief executive of Nightstone Housing Association, which has been one of Bristol City Council's partners for the last 30 plus years. And I've also been involved with Bristol in a number of other boards and partnerships, including on the West of England Local Enterprise Partnership, and before that the West of England Housing Group.
Local Enterprise Partnership, housing's got to be a big part of that, I would imagine. What is the Local Enterprise Partnership?
Local Enterprise Partnership is a collaboration between business members and local authority members charged through formal structures of driving the growth, economic growth, creation of new jobs throughout the West of England.
And have they been successful? Have you been successful in doing that?
That's a good question. It is still work in progress. We have set ambitious targets through the Local Enterprise Partnership of 65,000 jobs up till 2026, I think it is. And we're certainly so far seeing encouraging signs that the work done is driving investment in Bristol and investment in the West of England generally.
Well, back to the Homes Commission, because this is a big ask, isn't it? We've got 15,000 people who are actually registered homeless in the city. Probably the total is more than that. And we've also got a lot less, it seems, social houses being built nowadays. The government's focus doesn't seem to be on social housing as it had been in previous years so much. So are you going to be delivering those homes?
Well, what we've tried to do through the Bristol Homes Commission is identify what the critical issues that we think have to happen to achieve our report's purpose, which is more homes faster homes. The brutal reality is that there is a housing crisis in Bristol. The good news is that Bristol has been a success story, and it is that success that actually has led to the housing crisis, because Bristol's growth, it's a hugely popular place to live, it's an attractive city, it's a destination of choice, both for people coming to visit, people wanting to come and live, and for business investors. And what that's meant is that housing demand has far outstripped supply.
Now, you're not making any great promises about being able to deliver that supply, but what you have done is you've come up with 10 big ideas, things that need to change in order for that to happen.
If we just had to pick one big theme of what we could do, then what we want to do is encourage Bristol City Council to work with other public sector partners to really look at how it can unlock more land and make more land available for housing supply. Land is the critical raw material in the housing process, and in order to deliver more homes, the bottom line is we need more land made available for City Council's partners, either through other public sector partners or through the Homes and Communities Agency, or indeed City Council's own land. And we need as much of that land released in as many imaginative ways as possible.
That was Nick Horn from Nightstone Housing, who chaired your Housing Commission, George. Now, the big ask here is, and as Nick's saying, is are the people who can build those affordable homes and also social housing, are they going to get the land?
Yes. And funnily enough, I was chairing the Bristol Property Board today, and the Bristol Property Board is something I instituted on being elected as mayor, and brought together all the principal public landowners across the city to make those strategic decisions. And we're working with our Homes and Communities Agency and Public Health and others, the NHS and others. So we made some decisions today that will see hundreds of new homes built as a result of us working together. So
but what about affordable homes?
We are immediately responding to that.
But affordable homes often means that people can't actually afford them. They need social housing, don't they?
Well, affordable homes is it's an extraordinary expression, because they're affordable by somebody but not by others. So I think also what matters is that we develop more council housing as well. I'm a great advocate of council housing. We've got 28,000 council homes in the city, and some of those have land around them. So I think we can make more use of our own estate. The problem is the government are limiting the amount we can borrow to build. Now, I just think that is daft, because it's not like borrowing to spend, it's borrowing to invest, and it's investing in jobs and homes and the economy, and we get a payback on it. So I'm twisting the arms of government very strongly, and I think we're getting signs of success in terms of the attitudes of the parties leading up to the general election, that we will get a more liberal attitude to us being able to borrow to build more council houses.
But that's a hangover from the Thatcher era, isn't it? I mean, surely someone must have realised by now that it makes sense for a local authority to be building homes, because then they get a return over a long period of time.
It makes more sense for Bristol.
They house their people.
It makes more sense for Bristol than almost any other city outside the southeast. And
why is that?
Because we are one of the more prosperous. We are the most prosperous city outside the general wider southeast. And so of the 8 core cities, we're the one city that is positively contributing to that magic GDP, and we as a result are expanding faster than any of those other cities, and therefore we have a greater housing need. And because house prices are high in a relatively rich city, homes are generally less affordable by those at the lower ends of the income scale.
Can you just explain the Bristol Property Board, how that works, and the local enterprise partnership? These are sort of new kind of side issues to government, half business, half government, and I think it's really important to understand how they work.
Well, they work a bit like my cabinet in a way, in that I value the advice, and actually we've with the new constitution that I've negotiated and that we passed for the City Council, decisions can now be taken by me chairing the Bristol Property Board with the advice of those who, those in those various sectors who can bring their expertise to it. So it does. It enables quicker and probably better informed decision making than we
Sounds
than we
good,
used to have.
but when it was first announced, I remember looking on Twitter about, and one of the big hotel chains was saying, "Great, now we're going to get our hands on some nice cheap Bristol City Council land to build one of our hotels on," and that isn't surely what this is about. How are you going to stop the commercial end of the local enterprise partnership, the Bristol Property Board, actually just grabbing land to make money for themselves?
Because we'll be very, very cautious about not allowing them to do that. It's not just about selling land. And I was saying this very strongly to one of our members today. I said, this is not just a set-up in order to flog land. What it is to make the best use of our land. We will be retaining it. We'll go into partnership with some of the other public owners, and we're doing that in order to make the best use of it. Now, that best use might be building a school or a public health facility, as much as it is building new homes or flogging it for profit, so that we can make better use of that money. Well, so it's every single aspect, but you can be absolutely assured the principal purpose is to make the very best, get best value for public land, whether it's transferred in ownership or not.
One of the things Daniela Radici from the Green Group, the leader of the Green Group, pointed out is that these meetings, many of them, these kind of partnership meetings, the new style way of doing things, are not open to the public. The minutes aren't open, so it's all it's the sort of place where, maybe not with you, George, chairing it, but in the future, little deals could be cooked up behind the scenes and the public would be none the wiser.
No, as in all things, there is some commercial confidentiality when negotiations are happening, but
I mean, are they open to the public?
Respect, they're as open as any other meeting.
Are Bristol Property Board meetings open to the public?
Well, no, it's sort of like a committee meeting in a committee room. It's like a board meeting. That's what it is. And they're not public spectator sports.
So is it a private business or is it a council meeting?
No, it's a mayor's meeting and I'm mayor of the city. I'm not mayor of the council. I'm mayor of the whole city. And I think that's what is transformational. It's transformational equally in education, where we're bringing all the various educational establishments of whatever governance together to work together. So the whole of the secondary sector, for instance, is working together rather than having council schools and academy schools and free schools. What's really important is that we're giving the proper schooling and education to all the city, and that is a perfect example, and we have a similar example with property, where as mayor of the whole city, I can bring these things together, and it is transformational.
But it's our land, George.
And we're going to
so why isn't this open to the public? Surely that's one thing you could do, is you could throw these meetings open to the public. Everyone could see what's happening with this massive resource that we've got in the city.
Well, because we're taking commercially sensitive decisions. So, it'd be absolutely impossible to take some of those decisions when you've with a public,
don't you agree that this is the best way to do it? Is in an open, accountable way.
I'm very open. Look, there's nobody more open, Tony, than me in terms of the way things are done. That is my default position, is to be open. But I realise that you're going to have people taking commercial advantage if they and land and property is one of the areas where you've got to be most careful of people not taking commercial advantage of a situation.
But isn't the best way to let the press and public in there to see what's happening? I mean, that's the traditional way of democracy works.
Yeah, as soon as the commercial confidentiality issue is gone, then it can be public. We don't hide anything, and we're very good at disseminating information, but it's got to be at the right time.
Okay, also news this week. You had quite a heated council meeting on Tuesday, a full council meeting, and about a motion. I'm not sure if it was a motion. Maybe you can help us about
a petition
abolishing the office of mayor. Now,
it wasn't about abolishing the office of mayor. It was about residents parking, and the motion, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was a motion of no confidence in the mayor's residents parking policy.
Yes, there's a lot of people who are very annoyed about that, and they feel that this is just simply a lot of the areas where these resident parking zones are going in are actually fine. They don't need any resident parking zones, and people don't need to be paying anything really to share the roads. And also, of course, you've gone for Clifton first, largely because people in Clifton can actually afford to pay for residents parking, and also.
No, I haven't gone for Clifton first. It started at Kingstown, and then it went to Cottam and Redland, and then it went to Easton, and then it went to Clifton Hotwells and Clifton Wood and Hotwells, and now it's going to Clifton and then to Clifton East. And
when's it going to go to St Paul's? Because this is the knotty one, isn't it? Everyone uses St Paul's as this uses Ashley St Paul's St Werburgh's as a car park to then walk into the city centre.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point. You're saying that's
the biggest problem.
It is necessary in all these
areas.
Well,
that's the biggest problem,
and
isn't it?
It's not about whether we do it, it's about how we do it. And I absolutely understand. Amongst those, the relatively small number of marchers, because I was expecting a demonstration, for all the noise there had been, I was expecting a demonstration of about 1,000 people, and I think there was tens of people, it was about 50 or 60 or something. Of those marchers, there will be some people with absolute genuine fear, and I understand that. If you're running a small business, there's going to be change, you do fear that change is going to damage your business. What I can say, and all I can say, is that the general experience is that things get better after implementation. And that is the difficult thing in terms of democracy. You have to run a democracy. If you're leading a city, you have to be able to demonstrate the benefit of change. And I know that benefit has been demonstrated in the areas where this has been brought in, but people somehow think that it's going to be different in their area and it's going to damage them. Now, there will be inevitably some losers. There will also be some failing businesses who then decide that the residents' parking zone is the real blame of what that was inevitably going to happen otherwise, and I can't help that. So I've got a lot of respect for those with a genuine fear. To add it on to that, there is a bit of political mischief making as well, and while in a way it was hilarious to bring out a tank, it became a lot less hilarious when that clashed with the Palestinian Gaza demonstration. And so I think people need to get these things into perspective. But
look, George, the main problem here is, it's got to be, hasn't it? People just see this as, this is just a new tax, a new excuse to tell us we've got to pay for stuff that from time immemorial, actually, since the invention of the car, I suppose it is, it's just been something we share. We share our space, and also on the streets. And what we've done is we're going up a whole level here, from the basic stuff to do with if you want to use a parking meter or whatever, into even if there is a normal space, there's no problem with parking. You're going to have to pay for a permit of some sort. Look, a new tax.
It's not a new tax at all. It is about improving our environment and our health. I mean, I think it's absolutely appalling the way, since the war, we have taken our streets and our community spaces away from our children. I think it's appalling that we have worsened our air quality, and we're killing 3 times as many people in the city through the poor quality air as a result of the cars driving around and looking for parking spaces, etc., than we are killing them by accidents.
But this is not us, is it? This is the oil industry lobby over decades has been lobbying for the car.
But I think, Tony, you must recognise that we have stolen a huge amount of community resource away from our children and families and old people.
Well, let's not blame ourselves,
of this obsession,
George. It's not we, it's them. It's the oil industry and the oil industry lobby, not us.
No, all of us who drive cars have.
Well, but they have forced us in a situation where we need a car. Most of us would much rather not have one.
Yeah, I drive a car as well, but I try never to drive it to go to work, simply to go to work. And I'm more and more, I'm finding the huge benefit of being on a bike. I know people think I'm just bike mad. I'm not bike mad.
We had an amazing network of railways in the city, for example, in the 1960s. It was decapitated, lobbying from the oil industry. Martin, what are your thoughts about this whole business of residents parking? Is it all going to work out?
Well, I think the big issues are as pointed out by George and as pointed out by yourself with the oil industry. any change in any direction is bound to be painful for some people. I mean, the centre of Gloucester now is completely pedestrianised, has been for some time, and I love going to visit Gloucester because you can walk around what was the medieval city, inside what was the old Roman fort, and you can see the Via Appia and all the rest of it. It's all there, and it's really fantastic. But of course, when they tried to change that years ago, there was a huge row because, of course, lots of businesses went bust that were relying upon people coming in their cars into the city centre. So any change like this is bound to put some people out of business, and those people are going to fight.
Well, so couldn't you do park and ride up at the M32, M4 junction, for example, George? I mean, that's a no-brainer, surely.
Well, we definitely need park and ride to the north of the city. We will certainly be putting in park and ride to the north of the city. My absolute... I'm absolutely determined that we don't put it on valuable agricultural land, but we've got to be strategic in terms of putting in all that infrastructure. And for instance, for Clifton, there's been a huge amount of noise about Clifton, but I can tell you the majority of residents want a residence parking zone. It's not rocket science. It's happened most other places. Bristol happens to be behind the curve on it.
Okay, anyway.
And we are a very congested city.
Looking at some other news, England's actually poorest will live 9 years less than the richest, according to stark new... It's the good old Office for National Statistics over in Newport again. Millions of people across England are destined to die 9 years earlier than they should and have their lives blighted by ill health prematurely because they are poor. Shocking new figures released by the Office for National Statistics have prompted urgent calls for action and forced government officials to admit the situation of health inequality is unacceptable. George?
I think it's completely unacceptable, and I think it is one of the society's biggest challenges. As it happens, I've just been looking at new public health figures in Bristol, and it's nearly the national average. I mean, Bristol is a microcosm of the whole of British society in a way, and that we do go from the very rich to the very poor, and we have an 8-point-something life difference expectancy with women, I think it is, and 6-point-something with men. It may be the other way around. So I do think that that's completely unacceptable. What's even more unacceptable, actually, is life quality. I've got an ancient mum who's 95. Stop counting almost, and I care much more not about the length of her life. I care much more about the quality of her life, and I feel extremely lucky. I'm in good health, but the average for enjoying good health is 63 years now. That's not long enough. I'd much prefer to see the average of enjoying good health going to 75 than the average life expectancy going to 95.
OK, well, we've got a big Islamic community here in Bristol, and so let's have a look at this massive story from Birmingham, which has been a big national issue, a running sore, really, since the spring. The Trojan Horse Report. Birmingham teachers believed Lee Rigby murder was a hoax. This is the International Business Times. Teachers in Birmingham schools wanted to promote their conspiracy theories about the murder of Lee Rigby. At the centre of the Trojan Horse allegations, they believed that murder was a hoax. They wanted to promote this view. The report adds teachers also exchanged social media messages to show an intolerant Islamist approach, including a constant undercurrent of anti-Western, anti-American and anti-Israeli sentiment. Martin?
Well, this is obviously a big can of worms. The original Trojan Horse fax was demonstrated to be a fraud, a hoax itself. So this whole thing was kicked off in the first place by somebody fraudulently making up that fax. This is stuff taken out of context. I mean, there's no evidence of what you might call organised militant extremism. What we're talking about here is people with certain views which some people don't like, and I think as Tim Brighouse, who used to be the Chief Inspector of Schools in Birmingham, was saying, how ridiculous to get a former counter-terrorism officer to investigate schools, and he's found no evidence of terrorism. What he's found is some views that some people might find challenging. Should we be teaching
our children that the Lee Rigby murder was a hoax?
No, what's happened here is people are talking privately on social media about what their own views are about this particular thing. Now, actually, there's a lot of evidence to show that NATO intelligence services have been involved in terrorist activities in Italy, in Belgium, in Ireland. I could go on. You know, I'm a bit of an expert about this. We could discuss it. So it's not unreasonable for people to discuss the possibility that the hoax might be involved in this particular case. I mean, certainly the case of 7/7. The Boston bombing is also mentioned here. That's very definitely looks as if there's something fishy about that.
Anyway, what's your thoughts about this, George? I mean, it's a big issue in Birmingham. It's a national issue, and maybe echoes here.
My thoughts is that we generally have a very healthy Muslim community and some really good people, and these sort of stories don't help. And so at the time of Ramadan, I really, the last thing I want to do is stir the pot.
Okay, George.
I also want to say that I think the Muslim community is going through some really difficult times.
Okay, time for the Murdoch News at 6, George. Got to hold you there, I'm afraid.
Right,
Thank you very much. That was Bristol's Mayor, George Ferguson there. After the Murdoch News, more of everything Britain's mainstream media is keeping away from you.
On the Hour, live from the Sky News Centre.
From the Sky News Centre at 6, a mum's admitted beating her 3-year-old son to death. Rosedeep Adekoya pretended Mikhail Kula had gone missing in January to cover up the fact that she'd buried him in woodland more than 20 miles from their Edinburgh flat. These neighbours are in shock.
It was more than one beating he got, and I'm just disgusted.
No smiling or nothing, just looking like, I have to say, well, now you think, somebody help me sort of thing, you know, but for us not to know it's very heartbreaking.
She'll be sentenced in a month's time. It's been revealed that a British man was among those killed in the Air Algeria. 116 people from Burkina Faso in North Africa to Algiers came down in Mali yesterday. The UK economy has finally emerged from its 6-year depression. Economic activity rose by 0.8% in the second quarter of this year. The crucial moment in the government